Back in early 1886, Lord Rosebery, who was about to become the Foreign Secretary, was pretty anxious about meeting Queen Victoria. He was a young Liberal politician, around his 30s, and she had been ruling for nearly 50 years. When he finally got to meet her, Victoria, who was super experienced and never shy to say what she thought, started telling him straight up what he should do in foreign policy. She told him, "Don't take too many things to the cabinet because they never get anything done there." She said he should talk about everything with me and Mr. Gladstone in private. She also mentioned that she often got secret info that would be really interesting and helpful for him, coming from a trusted source. Queen Victoria wrote all about this amazing chat in her diaries. Now that they've been put online, we see a whole new side of her, like a royal spy master. During her time as queen, Victoria set up a huge spy network with her family all over Europe, from Germany to Spain. She used this network to give the British government a hand in dealing with the tricky politics of Europe in the 19th century. If the government's plans didn't match her family's interests, she'd quickly use her sources to outsmart her own government. Victoria wasn't just the serious all-black-wearing person we usually think of staying in Windsor Castle. She was actually really good at gathering secret information, working undercover, analysing things, and using intelligence. Basically, she was like the queen of spies. Victoria was just 18 when she became queen in 1837 and had a pretty protected childhood. But as she grew up, her uncle Leopold, who was the King of Belgium, taught her some sneaky stuff about international politics. He explained to her how countries often intercepted and read letters before sending them on. As queen, Victoria could use this to her advantage by writing letters in a way that would send a specific message to whoever was snooping. For Victoria, this was a very personal issue. When she started her reign, there was a big gap in spying. The Metropolitan Police only set up its first detective branch in 1842, and the Secret Service Bureau, which later became MI5 and MI6, wasn't around yet. The public in her country thought spying was something only foreign countries did, linking it with tyrants and secret police. But Victoria had lots of connections in Europe. She needed inside information not just to keep her dynasty safe, but also to protect herself. On the evening of June 10, 1840, Victoria and Albert were leaving Buckingham Palace in a carriage. As they were going down Constitution Hill, Victoria was shocked by the loud sound of a gunshot. In her diary, she wrote that their carriage stopped all of a sudden. She saw a small guy standing nearby, holding a gun in each hand. He quickly shot again, and Victoria ducked as another loud bang rang out. Albert was shocked and shouted, "My God!" But he quickly calmed down and told Victoria not to worry. She told him she wasn't scared at all. As the police came to catch the shooter, Albert told the driver to just keep going like nothing had happened. The Queen was really intrigued by this whole thing. Over the next few days, she turned into a sort of detective, checking a wall nearby for bullet marks, talking to the Prime Minister about the type of bullet and where it came from, and even looking at the guns that might have finished her off, and perhaps Albert too. She wanted to know everything about the investigation and found out that the police had caught a young guy named Edward Oxford. Interestingly, they found letters at his place about a secret group called Young England. Oxford said it had 400 members, including the King of Hanover, who would have been king if Victoria had died, and even Lord Palmerston, the Foreign Secretary. It turned out to be all made up, but it really got Victoria interested in spying, secrets, and all that mysterious stuff. 4 years after Victoria became queen, undercover policing was starting to take off in Britain, and that's when a big spy scandal happened. Giuseppe Mazzini, an Italian rebel living in London, was sending messages to other rebels in Calabria. He thought the British government was snooping on his mail, so he tried a trick. He put hair strands, poppy seeds, and sand in envelopes, sealed them with wax, and mailed them to himself. When they arrived, they were still sealed, but the special contents were gone. Furious, Mazzini told his friend, the radical MP Thomas Slingsby Duncombe, who then made a big deal out of it in Parliament. This news made a lot of MPs really mad. They couldn't believe the government was spying on political stuff. One MP even said it was totally against what the English people stood for. The Home Secretary got nicknamed Fouché, like Napoleon's spy chief, who was famous for political spying. Meanwhile, Queen Victoria wasn't bothered by all this. She felt for her royal relatives in Europe who were dealing with violent rebels, and she wasn't shocked by these spying stories. After all, she was used to reading intercepted letters herself. She noted in her diary that some were most impertinent, others were curious, and some even made her laugh. She couldn't get why everyone was making such a fuss about the Mazzini incident, saying that the Home Secretary should have the power to read letters in moments of difficulty. During this time, the idea of replacing monarchies with republics was getting more popular. By 1848, revolutions were happening all over Europe, really shaking up the usual royal rule. The British government decided to just wait and see, and kind of liked the mess it was causing in its European rivals' capitals. But Queen Victoria was really upset. She kept reading reports from her family all over Europe about murders, and she was shocked at how easily these revolutions were happening. She got really angry when she learned that Palmerston, one of her ministers, had secretly agreed to sell weapons to rebels in Sicily who were fighting the King of Naples. She wrote in her diary, startled to learn that this was done and sanctioned by Lord Palmerston. Her own sources told her that leaders in Europe now thought Britain was secretly backing all these rebellions. Trying to fix this mess, she tried but failed to get Palmerston to quit his job. Victoria wanted her government to take the threat from revolutionaries in London more seriously. She had her own spy network, agents, plus family and friends, especially in Germany, telling her about rumours of plots directed from London to kill all the kings and queens. Her family members were asking her to tell her government to either watch these people more closely or kick them out of the country. When she heard about violence in Vienna, she was really worried about her dear ones who were trapped and said, "These horrible Republicans should be exterminated." Victoria was annoyed that her government wasn't doing much, so she started relying more on her own sources, especially when her family's interests didn't match the government's. In the late 1850s and 1860s, she had a special spy in the Prussian palace. Her daughter, Princess Victoria, aka Vicky, married the future King of Prussia and German Emperor Frederick, aka Fritz, in 1858, and started sending her mum sensitive info from the Prussian court, which gave Queen Victoria an edge over her own ministers. When the war between Denmark and Prussia started in 1864 over Schleswig and Holstein, Victoria used her spy network to outsmart her own government. Palmerston, her minister, wanted to help Denmark, but Victoria was on Germany's side. She didn't want a war with Prussia and kept pushing Palmerston to back off from defending Denmark. Victoria got a lot of help from her daughter Vicky's spy work. Vicky sent her mom loads of secret info about Prussia's plans, how the battles were going, the weather, and even letters from her husband's assistant. Vicky also criticized the intelligence the British Foreign Office was getting, saying their ambassador in Berlin didn't know anything about German affairs, was always wrong, and used bad sources. Victoria had other spies too, not just her family. She got information from Lawrence Oliphant, a well-known mystic, writer and traveller. He spent time in Schleswig-Holstein and with Vicky in Prussia, then went to Windsor Castle to tell Victoria everything he knew. She even had a spy in her own government. Lord Granville, a former foreign secretary who was then Lord President of the Council, secretly told Victoria what other ministers were thinking. With all this secret info and a spy in the cabinet, Victoria convinced the government not to fight for Denmark. In October 1864, Denmark gave up Schleswig and Holstein to Prussia and Austria. But Vicky's reports started getting more worrying. She told her mum about Otto von Bismarck, the powerful minister-president of Prussia, who was controlling the Prussian king and planning to start a war with Austria by 1866. The British Foreign Office had no clue about this, showing how important royal spies were. Vicky's information was so spot-on and sensitive that she began writing in a code the Foreign Office couldn't crack. Victoria also got a ton of letters from other royal families in Europe, all saying war seemed more likely. For instance, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha boasted about having confidential and trustworthy contacts in Vienna and Berlin who kept him informed about the most secret proceedings. These secret messages were sent without the British government knowing, which really annoyed the Foreign Secretary. Victoria secretly told the Prussian king to watch out for Bismarck's sneaky ways. She wrote to him, "You are deceived," and said, "You are made to believe that you are to be attacked, and I, your true friend and sister, hear your honoured name attacked and abused for the faults and recklessness of others, or rather more of one man." She made sure this note was hand-delivered to avoid Bismarck's spies. Victoria was really good at understanding the royal intelligence she got and worried about a war. She wanted to do something about it. But the Foreign Office diplomats kept thinking Germany was becoming more liberal and didn't really get what Bismarck was about. They were sure there wouldn't be a war. Even though Victoria didn't want it, the cabinet decided to stay out of it. She couldn't make them see it her way this time. War started in June 1866 and ended 7 weeks later with Prussia winning. Still, Victoria kept arguing against staying out of things. She told the Foreign Secretary that she'd share any private intelligence which she may receive, but actually she would only share the info that supported her own views. Victoria wasn't as well informed about Russia and the competitive empire building known as the Great Game. When her son Alfred married the Russian Tsar's daughter, Maria Alexandrovna, in 1874. Victoria hoped to get inside info on the Russian court, like she did from Vicky, but it didn't work out that way. Alfred and Maria's marriage wasn't very happy, and they didn't spend much time in Russia. So, Alfred could only give her small bits of information now and then. Instead, Victoria focused on a different type of spy, people who were part traveller, part adventurer, and part soldier. One of them was Frederick Burnaby, who gathered intelligence from the front lines of the empire. In the fall of 1875, he rode across Russia and Central Asia on horseback, avoiding both Russian officers and the danger of frostbite. After his journey, Victoria called Frederick Burnaby to Windsor Castle to hear about his exciting travels and to learn what he knew about the Russian threat. She was really into his stories and totally agreed with him that Russia was sneaky and dangerous. In 1877, when Russia started a war with the Ottoman Empire, Burnaby sent even more intelligence from the front lines. As Russia moved its army into the Balkans, Victoria was sure they were aiming for Constantinople. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Disraeli, trusted the Russian Tsar more and believed Russia wouldn't attack the Ottoman capital. But Victoria, with her secret info, thought she knew better. This time her source was Arthur Balfour Haig, who worked for her son Alfred. She told Disraeli about this, keeping her source a secret, and dramatically warned that if Russia took Constantinople, she'd be so embarrassed she might have to give up the throne. During the war between Turkey and Russia, Victoria was really aggressive towards Russia. She picked out bits of intelligence that supported her views and used them to push her government to challenge the Russians. Once, she used a report about Russian artillery attacking ambulances, even though it wasn't a sure thing, and neither the Prime Minister nor the Foreign Secretary knew about it. Her private secretary said that the government's reaction to Russia was all because of Victoria. Victoria constantly demanded more intelligence and put a lot of pressure on the government. One minister's wife said Victoria was out of control, always bothering her ministers and pushing them towards war. Victoria even accused the Foreign Secretary's wife of spilling secrets to the Russians and told Disraeli to be bold. But the government was divided, especially the Foreign Secretary, who didn't want to get involved. So Victoria took matters into her own hands with some secret diplomacy. She sent an unofficial warning to the Russian Tsar that Britain would fight if Russia attacked Constantinople. She didn't tell the Foreign Secretary, so her message made Britain's stance seem tougher than it was. It was a royal bluff. The Tsar eventually backed off, but only when his armies were almost at Constantinople. By 1881, the threat of assassination was again a major concern for intelligence services. Victoria, now older and close to her golden jubilee, was shocked by the news of the killing of Tsar Alexander II by revolutionaries. She was so angry that she wrote in her diary, "No punishment is bad enough for the murderers." Even though these revolutionaries had nothing to do with Britain, the incident brought up the issue of London not wanting to spy on political activists. Victoria, feeling for other rulers under threat, wanted to kick out all refugees from Britain. The Prime Minister Gladstone was really upset by this idea, which went against typical British values. But the danger from anarchists was increasing, and in the next 20 years, terrorists killed the French President Sadi Carnot and Empress Elizabeth of Austria-Hungary. Victoria complained that Britain's policy of letting these monstrous anarchists and assassins to live here and hatch their horrible plots in our country was causing a lot of damage to its international reputation. In reaction, Victoria started pushing for countries to work together against terrorism. Thanks to her influence, in 1898, the British Prime Minister, the Marquis of Salisbury, sent people to a conference in Rome to talk about this. Britain didn't join in on many decisions, but they did agree to share more intelligence with other countries. Victoria knighted the British delegate for his work. When Victoria passed away in 1901, after over 63 years as Queen, she had a unique career in her own kind of secret service. She always wanted to know the latest secrets, spent time with spies, and tried to analyze intelligence herself, though she wasn't always unbiased. She was deeply involved in politics, constantly pushing her ministers to increase surveillance. She made sure she knew everything her ministers did and built her own spy networks to stay ahead of her government. As her reign went on, she increasingly saw security matters as her own area to control. She used intelligence for her own interests, which sometimes caused tension between the Crown and her ministers. After all, having information meant having power,